Consider this. If you look at some of the greatest change makers and all their genius ideas and groundbreaking moments, what you might find is that there is a common theme behind each of their stories. There's a fundamental thing that each of them possesses that is really what drives them to their successes. Some of the biggest and the best societal innovation actually all stems from one simple trait. But what you might not know is that this trait is actually encoded into each of us as well. In fact, it's inherent to the human condition. This trait is curiosity. Now, the dictionary defines curiosity in rather simple terms, as the desire to know. But the essence of curiosity, though, is so much more than that. It's the refusal to just accept the what's in life, and it's the constant thirst for the whys and the hows, and the strong drive to uncover them. And so tonight, I'm excited to explore with you the why and the how to be curious. Now, oftentimes in our society, curiosity is treated like a fixed attribute. You either have it or you don't. When in fact, the opposite of this is true. The ability to ask questions is innate to the human mind, and lucky for us, it's also the foundation for being innovative and for leading a meaningful life. Now, to start, think of a time when you were inundated with questions by a young child. It can almost seem overwhelming, the pressure to constantly provide these answers for them. But this childlike inquisition is natural, as being relatively new to the world, asking questions is the best and the simplest way to learn. But what we often find is that as children mature, they tend to ask fewer and fewer of these questions, and their observant and inquisitive nature can actually begin to falter. We hear less of the question that we know to dominate a young child's vocabulary. Why? In fact, a study of over 600 kindergarten students actually observed this curiosity drop to take place right around the time when kids become school-aged. The creativity of a kindergartner, ranked at a high 84%, has been found to drop as low as 10% by the time they reach the 2nd grade. Well, where does it all go? What happens now is that societal pressure kicks in, and kids can want to appear more confident and to show expertise, which, in our society, is too often synonymous with being right. And so kids stop asking and they start telling. And by the time we're adults, the curiosity has almost been wrung out of us. A study of over 2,000 American and German employees actually identifies 4 fundamental dimensions of curiosity. And the first one they found is called joyous exploration. Now, this is likely what you immediately think of when you hear the word curious. It's interest-based inquisition. Joyous explorers are motivated by their own questions, and they actually feel enlightened when finding the answers to them. They see unfamiliar situations as primarily an opportunity to learn, and this is exciting. Now, the next dimension is stress tolerance, and this is described as one's perceived capacity to cope with the stress of confronting new, volatile, or complex situations. Anxiety-inducing work is not actually a factor that detracts from a stress tolerator's motivation to try new things. In fact, they want to ask big questions, even if it might seem stressful or scary. Now, the next dimension is social curiosity, or openness to people's ideas. Now, this is described as the proactive search for a breadth of perspectives regardless of their originator. These curious people actually want to hear from everyone, and this is an indicator of their curiosity. They learn best through social interaction, and they want to deeply understand the people that they are learning from. Now, the final dimension is deprivation sensitivity, and this type of curiosity is prompted by urgency and driven by tension. I'm sure we're all familiar with the unpleasant state of uncertainty that kind of hangs in the air until an information gap is closed or until a problem is resolved. It's not always pleasant, but it is stimulating. And when there is pressure for innovation, these curious people actually come up with better solutions even faster. A great example of this was incredibly relevant across the world just a few short years ago. The pressure to create a vaccine for COVID-19 was quite literally a life or death situation. And it was this pressure that pushed researchers to be innovative and to get curious about ways to combat the pandemic. And the result was a vaccine that helped attack the crisis of COVID. And so it was deprivation sensitivity that was displayed by these researchers. Now, these are the 4 dimensions of curiosity. And what's great about this research is that it demonstrates that there is no universal definition. Everyone can be curious, but it just comes down to the way in which we cultivate it. But what's even more fascinating is what these researchers concluded. There are actually several inherent benefits that exercising curiosity provides. Now, first of all, being curious benefits the individual. As shown in the study, curious employees actually function at a higher level. They were found to be more deeply immersed in their tasks, more proactive in their problem solving, and they even generated more creative ideas. In fact, throughout every dimension, curiosity was associated with innovative behavior. And this is the exact type of employee performance that so many companies aim for. But what's more than the way they acted at work was the way they felt at work. These curious employees actually found more positive experiences, more meaning, and more learning opportunities in their professional lives. This wasn't because they experienced fewer problems, but because when they did, they were able to create more innovative strategies to overcome them. In fact, just by being curious, these employees were more enthusiastic and resilient in their professional lives. But it goes beyond even this. Our own curiosity can actually positively impact those around us, in our teams, our organizations, and even our entire society. I had the privilege of speaking with the founder of the business consulting company, Curiosity Inc. And what she shared with me was this. When her clients could effectively cultivate their curiosity and put it into practice, they benefited not only their own work, but their research partners and their entire corporations. In fact, this positive change was still present many years after their sessions together. And this is because of the positive culture shift that being curious instills. And so this is the secret to the most successful and the happiest individuals. These findings actually give us the model for high performance and for satisfaction in our professional lives, as well as how to be innovative and to positively impact our society. Now, considering these benefits, it's worth asking, what is holding us back from leading these curiosity-driven lives? Research from the Forbes School of Business actually identifies several inhibiting factors of curiosity in the workplace. And the first one they found is fear. Now, there are several different things that can stimulate our fear, but a primary example of this is the fear of failure. Now, consider that feeling of having a pressing question, but choosing not to ask it simply because of concern for your reputation. In a society heavily based around knowing the right answers, making the right moves, and always moving forward, it can be really hard to take risks, and it can be hard to switch from associating inquisition with incompetency to associating inquisition with insightfulness. And so we don't ask questions simply because of fear. Now, the next inhibitor is assumptions. It's also common to assume the answers to our questions, to suppress curiosity. And we can tend to do this almost as a quick fix or as a way to justify not investigating. But what's actually happening here is that we are feeding an inertia surrounding our curiosity, which can become a really limiting cycle. A Harvard study of 520 leaders from a variety of organizations actually revealed that practicing curiosity was discouraged in the workplace, as they assumed that it would stifle the orderliness of the company and lead to disagreements which would ultimately impede the decision-making process. This belief is untrue. And so this example really demonstrates how our assumptions can keep our knowledge static and limit our growth. Now, the final inhibitor is environment. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt the pressure to institutionalize yourself to your team or your company's work ideals? And have you ever felt that this is actually overriding an optimal approach to your work? In the early 1900s, Ford was the largest automobile company in the United States, and their success largely came from sticking to their company's model of efficiency. However, the success did not last long, as when the expanding American economy brought the expanding demand for novel car designs, the competitors adapted, but Ford did not, and as such, their sales dropped. Because of the limited company environment at Ford, they suppressed their own innovation and they fell behind. In order for a company to stay successful, outside-of-the-box thinking must be part of its culture. And if we find ourselves in an environment that is overriding an optimal approach to our work, we are being limited. And so these are the inhibitors of curiosity: fear, assumptions, and environment. Now, how can we overcome them so as to reap the benefits of being curious? Well, there are several different strategies that can be implemented. And the first is to determine the inhibitors in your life. Which of these factors could you relate to most, or which one, as soon as you heard it, instantly brought a specific situation to mind? Now, consider shifting your thinking slightly to a more positive way. Think about how reevaluating the exact inhibitors of our curiosity can actually become the catalyst towards it. Now, you might be wondering how this is possible, and if so, you just proved my point. By allowing ourselves to think differently about the inhibitors we identified, we are already settling into a curious mindset. And by making the conscious decision to come up with solutions to bypass these inhibitors, we are exercising curiosity. And then we can choose to ask more questions. Even by just asking simple things like why or what if, we are already settling into a curious mindset. In fact, this is exactly what happened to me. Several months ago, I became really curious. I remember watching my dad apply his sinus medication every evening before bed, and I started to wonder if people on a similar prescription actually take the spray as much as he does, and if there was a way to overall reduce this burden. This led me to research medication adherence, and when I found that patients can be non-compliant with up to 92% of their medications, I decided to pursue my curiosity. And for me, this meant just asking why and what if. And it really started that simply. The project moved progressively from trials in my kitchen to university labs to ultimately being recognized with national medals and awards from pharmaceutical companies. And now, to a pending patent and clinical trials. But my example is just one of many stories that demonstrates how all innovation starts with just a question. And when we can choose to ask even the smallest questions and really go after them, what we are doing is allowing ourselves to live more meaningful lives. And the results can make an impact far beyond what we anticipated. Because it is simple curiosity that inspires the extraordinary. Thank you.